Good afternoon and welcome to the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub Pavilion. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon and good evening to those that are following us virtually. My name is Masamba Choi. I'm leading the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, a hub that has been put in place to enhance the effectiveness of the use of innovation to serve people and climate. And basically what we are trying to do is to understand better what are the demand for climate and sustainability solution, because we have the SDGs, we have the climate goal, but unfortunately we have not been able to translate the climate goal and the sustainability goal into innovation goal, so that the solution provider can respond to this demand for climate and sustainability solution. So, to address innovation, we need two things: demand for innovation and supply for innovative solution. And this is where incubator and accelerator are playing a key role, because once the demand for climate and sustainability solution is formulated, we will need to have in front of this demand accelerator and incubator that will facilitate the development of solution as response to this demand. So this is why we consider three very important, this session on incubator and accelerator. So I will hand over to Dennis Pamlin, who will be chairing this session. Dennis, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Masamba. And this is really a session for you out there, because we did a quick calculation and 99.99% of all the startups is not at COP. And basically none of the incubators are here, because we haven't really had a solution agenda. The big polluters are here and they are trying to do their bidding of improving, that's great. But you are not still here. And I don't think you should be here. I think some of you should come, but most of you should virtually be here, because we need to create this virtual hub. And some of the best thinkers around the world about incubators are here virtually with us also. Simon Bennett from the International Energy Agency, who's been doing fantastic work on trying to help building an understanding and how to actually help the next generation solution provider. Niclas Carlsson from the Swedish Energy Agency, who's been doing world-leading work on actually bringing not just up the accelerator and helping them, the new generation of solution providers, but also bringing them out on the international market. And Frédéric Wils from GIZ in Germany, who's been champion one of the most exciting projects right now on the international arena, which is trying to get the Green Climate Fund to really build up a global innovation ecosystem in the global south. And last but not least, for those who you were here yesterday also, Smita Rakesh, who is really the co-host of this session together with us, and she will introduce herself later, and the fantastic challenge that we have been co-developing, and with Smita as the leader around this thinking. But before we jump into that, I'd just like to show you a little bit of slides and give a bit of a context to this. So if you can just show the slides here. So I'll try to go through them quite quickly. Next. So what it's really about is that we have started with an interesting challenge. Imagine if we just scrapped everything we had and said, where are the new ideas? Can we bring, because we have about less than 60 gigaton of solutions, but can we bring 60 gigaton of new innovations to the table from all around the world? And we think that is possible. But just to show people also that there is hope, we don't need to look backwards. We can look at all these amazing things that especially young generation is bringing to the table. Next slide, please. And this is one of our guiding slides, because we think the world is stuck in the 1990s perspective. We're trying to focus on the existing systems in the global north and how they should reduce emissions. We tend to think that we need to act where the big emissions are. And that's why we also focus not on cities, but regions and cities, because some of the most vulnerable people in need are not in cities. So that's where we talk. The 2020's perspective is not where the global rich people are emitting today, but how we bring the world into flourishing lives tomorrow. So if a solution is not possible to implement in a way that allow everyone on this planet to live flourishing lives, it's not sustainable, even if you reduce the emissions to zero, because most of those emissions are basically just using lots more biofuel or using lots more material in a way that don't allow everyone on the planet to live good lives. The second one, and the reason we're really having this focus on innovators and startups, next, is that for 100 years, we had a quite static economy. The cars got a little bit better, the fridges got a little bit better, the meat production got a little bit better. Then, in the beginning of this century, we had the digital solutions revolution and also a recognition that we need to think in new ways. So now, it's not about a better car. It's about drones, city planning, 3D printers. It's so many more ways that we can provide this to. And it's not just about getting better meat, it's about smart protein, and if that is by fungi-based or if that is bean-based or something, there's so many new ways to providing that. So we don't need to look at the current emitters and ask them to reduce. We should also open the door to everyone and say, how can you provide for human needs? Next slide, please. And that's where we have this guide and say, it's fantastic. Keep on reducing emissions and put on commitment from your polluters. You know, those who are invited because they have big problems and they are representing existing sectors, great. But we want to expand that innovation agenda and say, what are the human needs that are really needs to deliver on and who can provide solution from that? Sometimes there's an overlap. Very often the people here don't have an idea on where that solution, the cement, the steel, the shipping they use, is that really needed? Or is that part of an overconsumption society that is really catering to the global north in a way that is unsustainable in many, many ways, just for health, fast food, fast fashion, etc. And that is part of the challenge. Next slide, please. Next. So this is just, I did this not because these are the most important. I think these are some of the least important companies, but they're well known. And they didn't exist 30 years ago. When we started this climate thinking, when we started the idea that we should reduce emissions, the kind of structures we have now with big emitters committing to reducing their emissions, they did not exist. And I usually say as an example, imagine if we had the current climate thinking 30 years ago, and that was dominating. We would sit here now with fossil-free typewriters. We would celebrate the delivery of fossil-free produced CD records that was fossil-free distributed with cars. Because that is the current climate strategy to 90% today. It's just assuming that what we have today should reduce its emission to zero. No idea. And here we have, just these last 30 years, companies who are redefined how we think about how we move, how we do things. And as I said, these are some of the least interesting companies. Locally, there are even more cool solutions that are happening because they have managed to do this on mainstream on a global scale. So look at them, they're quite impressive, but there's so much more going on in the global economy. And some of them we also tend to forget, like the World Wide Web. Internet did not exist 30 years ago. Wikipedia, the third largest web platform on the planet, free information for everyone on the planet, didn't exist as an idea even 30 years ago. So these are things that people would not even see as utopia. And we're still looking at the big emitters of today and asking, how can you reduce your emissions? And that's going to get to an end today, hopefully. Next slide, please. Because we need now a new generation of incubators who not just take single products and just throw them out. They need to think about what the human needs are and how they can help those companies grow. And we also have a new generation of passionate, purpose-driven startup people. They're not just out there to make money, but most of the incubators around the world don't know how to deal with that. They just help anyone to make money. They assume that everyone is homo economicus and just want to be rich quickly. And the finance system is helping in that culture. But that is not what really drives a lot of people of today. So how do we change the system to embrace that? And next slide, please. And that's why we have developed a suite of assessment tools, not just for avoided emissions, but also for 1.5 compatibility and global sustainability. So how can you start assess these startups from that perspective? And the last slide, please. And that's really why we need people to come together also and realize that the way we think about solution is very often taking us in a technical perspective and single solution. But most of the most exciting things on how we rethink our consumption patterns, local vacation, etc., is not a single solution. It's someone who might be a producer of outdoor clothing, who is collaborating with a train provider, who's collaborating with someone who's providing these exciting local vacation providers. And that is not, and the old way of thinking would say, how do we make fossil-free fuel to the Thailand trip? But you can fundamentally rethink what the enjoyment in life for people. And that is what we think this is so exciting. And that's why I'm so happy to have this session and with you out there in the virtual world to join this movement, because you're going to hear about a very interesting challenge that Smita is going to talk about. So over to you now, Smita.
Strategy that we have for the context that, sorry, I can hear my voice back. There's an echo. Hello? Yes, thank you. So I'm going to talk about what we've done in India and also the strategy that we have for the context that Dennis has rightly said. I'm going to, I don't think I can share my slides here. So somebody will have to share the slides. But if I can just get started. What, when we're talking about in this session is how we need an expanded climate innovations agenda to essentially include all human-centric needs and also talk about access as much as talk about the net zero goals. And I think I'll take the theme of this session of incubators and accelerators where innovations are born to include a multi-tier ecosystem, because innovations don't need just to be born here. We also need to make sure that they don't die here. So next slide, please. Who are we? We are a multi-stage innovation, curation, and venture development platform, essentially working with science and technology-based startups on some of the most critical and complex problems. We believe in the power of entrepreneurship, especially for solving with the help of market-creating innovations. So what have we been essentially working on? Translation and solutioning and transfer of high-impact research and innovation, for it to become incentivized enough for industry and capital markets to adopt and diffuse and scale, is very, very complex in a sector such as climate. And therefore, this is a valley of death that we are primarily trying to fill. We understand that we need to work with entrepreneurs and solution providers, like Dennis mentioned, who are addressing some of these market failures. Next slide, please. So what does this translate into? It translates into exactly how Dennis said, focusing on sectors such as industrial decarbonization, which are some of the most polluting and biggest contributor to climate change, but also not losing sight of areas such as energy access, areas such as rural livelihoods, and especially when I speak with the context of India, of circular economy, of waste management. Some of these sectors which are not seen from an investment and mainstream capital world as very lucrative and profitable sectors, but are as important and critical to us solving for net zero. And therefore that, with a lens of public policy, focusing on innovation, curation, and clean tech incubation, but also with multi-stage risk capital. Next slide, please. So I'll spend some time on the slide talking about how we've built this full stack climate innovation architecture. We're also sharing this with our fellow incubators across the globe and urging them to share their strategies with us. So what we've realized that for climate innovation, it's not one link in the entire value chain that's missing. It's the entire ecosystem that's broken. And therefore, what we need is to put together this entire climate innovation architecture, layer by layer, at each stage. So we focus on impact thesis, which and early stage innovation curation, which could either mean programs and grant challenges, or even mean early stage lab incubators and entrepreneurship support programs and fellowships for curating some of the most impactful problem statements and solutions addressing them. At the incubation stage, and we're talking about how incubators and accelerators can reinvent themselves in order to not just remain these centers for originating solution providers and innovators, but also in taking them from lab to market. We've set up this Clean Energy International Incubation Center in Delhi, which is a unique public-private partnership recognized under Mission Innovation, funded by Government of India and Tata Trusts, where the idea is that we look at the broad spectrum of energy innovations in the entire lab to market enablement space. And we're also trying to support international startups entering India and use this incubator as a soft landing platform. This is also the platform that's launched an international scale-up network for enabling cross-border scale-up of climate innovations. We are also working on a deep tech innovator to source some of the most interesting solutions to one of the, some of the most historically unaddressed problem statements with the National Aerospace Laboratories in India. But beyond that, we are also closely working with some national governments and cities and regional agencies to ensure that priorities at subnational level are also focused when we talk about incubation programs and feeders to the large-scale innovation pipeline. When we talk of acceleration, it is very important to realize that each of the subsectors in climate require a very, very unique and customized approach. And therefore, there can't be, and this is one of the mistakes that we've been making for decades, there can't be one cookie cutter kind of an accelerator program. Reinventing of accelerator programs is required, which requires sector-specific focus. So we've launched an SDG 7 accelerator that focuses on scaling up energy access and livelihood-based solutions. We have a circular economy accelerator that works primarily on waste management innovations, not just from a climate lens, but also from dignity of labor and livelihoods of the waste pickers and those engaged in the waste value chain. We've recently also launched the Net Zero Industry Accelerator for industrial decarbonization for some of the most hard-to-abate sectors, such as steel, cement, aluminum manufacturing. But not to forget the small and medium enterprises, which is where it's a challenge of energy efficiency, but also of safety, also of suboptimal productivity and suboptimal income. Focusing on the urban transition, we're looking at sustainable construction and buildings, but also mobility, water, sanitation, and air pollution as some of the important areas, and focusing on this with a lens of smart cities for tomorrow. And finally, never to be forgotten is the climate resilient agriculture, the accelerator for which focuses more on grassroots partnership to make sure problems are bottom up, but also the solutions are only scaled up with close partnership with grassroots organization. So there we focus on pilot as well as scale up programs for innovations in the agri-tech ecosystem. To complement all of this is a multi-stage fund, which basically includes the grant capital to de-risk as well as seed support funding. But beyond that, also looking at a growth fund to ensure that there is no value of death in the investment pipeline, in the investment journey of a startup. Also syndication with other investors so that we are making sure that the entire investment gap in a startup's journey is filled. Complementing that with direct implementation on the ground and public policies, what is ensuring that we close the loop on this. If we can move to the next slide, please. So what have we done so far? We've actually supported more than 100 startups in the climate space in the last 5 years, and we've invested in 30 of them. So what are we geared towards now? And this is interesting. So we've come together with our strategy where we are saying by 2025, we'd have more than 100 solutions, purpose-driven solutions, which have a combined potential of avoiding more than 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. But more importantly, at least 35% of these innovations would be directly contributing to building climate resilience and focusing on de-risking the most vulnerable communities. Where is this confidence coming from is the evidence, thankfully with the support from RISE Institute and the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, that 20 of our supported startups so far have demonstrated a combined carbon dioxide avoidance potential of more than 200 million tons. And therefore, we are looking at how do we do it? We're looking at prioritizing not just the high emission sectors, but also including an expanded impact agenda where we focus on access to energy, water, health, education and basic quality of life, security of food, water, energy, and job, but also building resilience and adaptive capacities of communities most vulnerable to climate change, and also making sure that they are de-risked in our quest for achieving the net zero. So that's essentially the strategy that we have. And we'd love to hear from you all. The next slide, please. We'd love to hear from you all on your strategies, on how are you supporting some of these solution providers, the main heroes on the ground, and how are we ensuring that their solutions reach the market at a commercial scale. We'd announce together a challenge where we'd love to hear at the next COP some of these strategies which you've put in place and engaged with the best solution providers in your respective regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Smita. And I want to stress, did you hear what she said? She called a challenge for other incubators around the world to come to the next COP with a gigaton of potential for new solutions. They already have that. And Niclas and we have been working together. Sweden has already gathered that as well. So Sweden and India stands together now and challenge the rest of the world. And we will hear about Frédéric later also. We hope to bring the Global South soon also. But before we go into sort of the individual incubators, I'd like to give the floor to Simon Bennett from the International Energy Agency, because some people think that all the big institutions are only caring about the big polluters and looking at the old sectors. But I'd like for Simon to share a little bit of their world-leading thinking and how they've been trying to help to get more people understanding the importance of incubators around the world. And they've been extremely helpful in the work Smita and I have done in the work in mission innovation in this field. So over to you, Simon.
Great. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Dennis. And hi to everybody who's there in person, who's online, to fellow panelists as well. I'm not going to give an announcement about inventions that the IEA has made or incubators that we've funded. We're in the business of setting the global scene, setting the stage, and helping governments to make better policy around this stuff. And this is a big year for energy. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the International Energy Agency. We're an intergovernmental agency based in Paris. I hope that some of you have also seen that we launched our World Energy Outlook just 2 weeks ago. And that World Energy Outlook comes at a very special moment in energy. Energy is one of the largest parts of the climate challenge. And we're facing multiple energy crises this year. We shared in our World Energy Outlook our view of how these crises are actually going to shape not only the energy sector, but the global economy for many years to come. And that recent events, especially events this year, have shown that governments, they really want to move faster when it comes to deploying clean energy so that they can recoup the long-term security benefits and the long-term cost benefits as well. Now, there are some great headwinds that we see in this year because the United States has passed the Inflation Reduction Act. The European Union has got its Repower EU package in place, and a number of governments are doing some really big things to get behind this movement to deploy clean energy faster. But there's also tailwinds. There's also headwinds. Sorry, there's inflation. There is some global fragmentation in terms of alignment of countries around the world, and that's going to make it require more effort to bring down costs and get onto some of the key learning trends that we need to see in our scenario that we've presented to the world for getting to a net zero energy system or net zero emissions from fossil fuels by 2050 globally. And as Dennis said, that's not just about reducing emissions from the big sectors that we look at today in terms of where emissions are already happening. It's about behavioral change and changing the way in which the economy works in order to be able to accommodate more renewables and to require lower energy inputs in the first place. And central to that endeavor is innovation. We've been saying this quite clearly now for a few years. Technology innovation is not the only part of this puzzle, but it is a key one for a couple of reasons. One is that we need to expand the technology portfolio that we have to be able to cover all of the emissions that we need to avoid. And so that means that we need proven solutions in heavy industry, in long distance transport, in some things where we haven't yet got things off the shelf that can really tackle those challenges. But a much bigger set of innovations are going to come from people just being incentivized to make the existing things that we have nicer, so that they're more attractive for people to buy and to deploy, and definitely make them cheaper. And what we see when we look at that solution set, what's possible and likely in order to deliver the net zero emissions agenda, is that there's very different types of technologies, and there's a much bigger role in the future for smaller modular technologies, more digital technologies than there was in the past. The old energy system was about big chemical engineering reactors. It was about economies of scale. It was about monopoly businesses. Much of what we've seen, much of the reasons for optimism that we have today is because the technologies that we're able to bring to bear in the renewable sector are based on electrochemistry. They're based on electronics. They're based on things that don't scale in quite the same way, that they are mass produced, and mass production can bring down costs very, very quickly. And that's what we've seen with batteries. That's what we've seen with solar PV. And we can bring that same kind of logic to other parts of the energy world, and especially on the consumer side, where you can then have product differentiation that makes consumers adopt things much more quickly in some cases than the energy sector can in its sort of with the inertia that involves. So there's some real reasons for hope. And then in addition, we have everything that's happening on the digital side. And digital technology obviously can get through much more rapid learning and isn't subject to some of the same intellectual property concerns as other more traditional technologies. So governments need to be making innovation policy in this area quickly. They need to make concerted efforts, but importantly, they need to differentiate between technology types. And because of some of these smaller scale technologies, those can be mass produced. The way that those ideas are coming out of labs and universities, we realize that governments need to look at the area of startups and incubation much more closely. Also because we now have, for some governments, 5 or 10 years of really great experience of what's happening in this area. So earlier this year, the IEA published a report that's quite simply called How Governments Support Clean Energy Startups, and it covers all of the examples that we could find with case studies of what policymakers have been doing to experiment in this area and to bring some of the really great ideas through the hurdles, test them, get some of them to market, but also learn from the failures and not be afraid of failure as well, whether that's financing or incubation or a variety of different things. So I recommend to you that report that's on the IEA website. And one of the things that came out of that, and we covered what Smita is doing in that report. We looked at a number of different things, but just one thing to mention that we learned from some of the programs that are in place is the importance of just getting the next generation of energy companies in front of decision makers today. The existing set of businesses and vested interests have a disproportionate say in the future at the moment. So if you're making policy in this area, make sure you listen to the folks that are bringing through new technologies, starting new companies, taking risks, and what are their challenges and what are their hurdles. I'm going to very quickly close this brief intervention just by mentioning the importance of emerging markets and developing economies in this area. And there's 3 reasons why we think they're particularly important and particularly underserved. One is that when we look at the investment needed in our scenarios, this net zero scenario, more than half of the investment needs to happen in emerging markets and developing economies. We need solutions that are tailored to the cultural and climatic and geographical contexts in those places. They also just represent, those countries, a huge share of the brains that we can bring to bear on these problems if we can harness them together. And that if we want countries around the world to grow and to prosper, clean energy is going to be the growth engine this century in terms of economic growth and investment. And I think every country around the world has a reasonable aspiration to take part in new clean energy value chains. And our report that's going to come out in January, called Energy Technology Perspectives 2023, is going to look in particular at value chains, where the vulnerabilities and where the opportunities are in clean energy. So that's really just a few of the sort of the IEA messages that I wanted to convey to you today. And I'll finish by saying that the idea of incubators around the world working together to share challenges, to support companies through different stages of their development, but also, as Smita said, provide soft landings in some countries, transfer knowledge not only from north to south, but also south to south and south to north. I think that's very, very exciting. I mean, we're an agency that constantly says that we're just not going to get to the finish line unless there is a step up in international cooperation, especially in the area of innovation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to reiterate at least two of the very many good things that Simon was talking about. The fact that we have two parallel systems, one old system that needs to be improved, optimized, but a new emerging one that we don't know much about. And what Simon said, I think one thing that really should strike a chord here at COP is we need to get the new solution providers in front of policymakers. The next generation of young people are usually dismissed and put to the side as a special group, but as startups and the next generation of thinkers, they should be at the core. We listen to people we already know what they're going to say, and we don't listen to the new surprising voices. So I think that's a really valuable thing for us, and that's sort of behind the idea when Smita and I was discussing to make this an exciting challenge to really bring, because we don't want to be at the center. It's the hundreds and thousands of startups that we want to show the faces of at the next COP and say, these are tomorrow's solutions. Look at those people. They are giving their lives to trying to build this tomorrow. But we are still focusing almost always on the old polluters. So that's, and with that said, and something that we've been very keen on in Mission Innovation and in RISE is to really have a global perspective and have a global South perspective. That's where we also collaborate with Smita in Chile and other sort of emerging countries. And that's also where we came across the fantastic work by Frédéric that I'd like to hand over now, because I think the Catalyst program and initiative is hopefully also something that can be a really part of this challenge and help us by next COP to bring a really exciting group of people from the Global South also into this journey. Over to you, Frédéric.
Yeah, Dennis, thank you very much, and great to be here in this event. I have two slides, so if the IT colleagues could put them on the screen, it would be great. GIZ, Germany's Technical Assistance Agency. So we have worked actually for the last 3 years together with the Green Climate Fund on a global program to support super innovative climate tech startups. And I'm very happy that actually GCF eventually approved the funding for this program, for this Catalyst initiative just a month ago during its last board meeting. We also have funding from the German federal government, so we will launch this global initiative early next year. And as you said, Dennis, our ambition is to bring some first very exciting insights and success stories to next COP. If you do 3 clicks, then we see the full slide to the colleagues, to the IT colleagues. Thank you a lot. So with the GCF, we developed this program because we had the feeling that in emerging markets and frontier markets, especially in Africa and actually in French-speaking West Africa, that there is rather limited support for climate innovation. And so we have developed this initiative initially with 2 focus, one for West Africa and one actually for Latin America, which is obviously a much more developed environment. But we did both regions also to basically learn what works and what doesn't work, and also foster cross-continental collaboration. So what the initiative will do is, as I said earlier, we want to support early-stage climate tech startups. So early stage means startups that either already have a prototype product and are now developing it into an MVP, minimum viable product, or those startups that already have an MVP and really need now some support, conceptual support, training, and also funding for scaling in the local market. And so these are our pre-acceleration and the acceleration program. And then we also have even activities for individual entrepreneurs who kind of are excited about this new opportunity and want to move into this space. So we will have some community building ideation activities, and also we thought it's great to have some fantastic climate tech startups, but if the investors, mainly VCs, are kind of can't really judge the value of these solutions, then kind of it ends there. So we will also do some capacity building of VCs in the space of assessing climate impacts of those startups, also making sure that those startups are they consider diversity aspects and ESG. And what is very important for us in this initiative is that we support truly, obviously, impactful climate mitigation, impactful startups, but also that's what you mentioned earlier, Dennis, that the startups we support are not just the ones who make a kind of old school solution a little bit less resource intensive or a little bit more cost effective, but that they are really transformational. So we will apply a lens which really looks for these new solution providers in the selection process. I think what was very exciting for GIZ in developing this, that we partnered with impact investors and VCs, or always with one kind of lead impact investor VC in both regions, to make sure that this program really responds to the investor lens and the hunger of these investors, and that we don't just produce a lot of nice looking, nice sounding startups, but at the end of the day, there's some requirements that they don't fulfill, and then investors will walk away. So we're very excited about this very these partnerships that we developed over the last 2 years, and together with these VCs and impact investors, launched the Catalyst in these two regions. And I mean, I mentioned we initially will start. So the idea is, I think the dream is to replicate some of these programs in other parts of the world, together with leading accelerators and investors, always in a team. So I guess it will be fantastic to talk to Smita after the event, what's going on in India. Your presentation looked very, very exciting. And I think maybe I just stop here so we have a bit time for discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. And I think the sound wasn't that good, but the idea is a multi-million euro initiative from the Green Climate Fund to really build up capacity in the Global South. Because I think that's also what if you look at the scene here, we've really tried to make sure that we have people who understand the Global South and has a good relationship. And so much of the focus today is really on the West, and we really need a global perspective for this to be sustainable. And one of the persons who've been really having an international perspective from sort of the startup scene is Niclas Carlsson from the Swedish Energy Agency. I'd like for you to share some thoughts and your ideas, and the fact that Sweden, being one of the sort of gigaton exporting countries of today, with focus on solutions and with great partnerships with India, Indonesia, and other countries around the world. Over to you, Niclas.
Thank you, Dennis. So I will just mention something briefly about what we do, and just to sort of start off, we do have activities in roughly 15 to 20 countries around the world, focusing on different thematic and geographic areas. In our geographic areas, we do have India, Indonesia, US, Germany, and Ghana, where we also have accelerator programs running for quite some years. India especially, celebrating 10 years now. So the India-Sweden Innovation Accelerator, that's where we're going in the coming weeks. I do think that we are touching upon some of the very important aspects, such as being international and so on and so forth. But I do think it's quite important to also be narrow, be specific, be clear on what you want. I think it's very easy for a small company to focus on a country, much like India, for instance. maybe it's enough to focus on a state or even 2 cities to actually make it tangible. I think that's one mistake governments do all the time. And me having worked for the government my whole career, we tend to focus on a country as such, not the regions or the cities. And also to be daring enough to say that we as a government or as an agency, we're focusing on this area where we see a lot of potential. And then you move on after 2 or 3 years, focusing on a different area, not focusing on everything but nothing, as we say in Sweden. And I think it's very important that we pick the right areas. It puts a lot of pressure on us. We need to look maybe 3 to 5 years ahead of time, not what we're seeing now, but what we need to see now in order to make an impact in 3 to 5 years. And I think that's quite difficult. So we need to have our ear on the ground and understand what's happening. At the same time as we need to understand what's happening in our countries, what kind of technologies are we developing at the moment? And then we need to match those two. And that sounds very easy, but it's not, because if it was that easy, we would be much better than we are today. And I think that's something that we aspire to be coming up. I think it's also important to be skeptical in some aspects, to really understand, like you mentioned in the beginning, Dennis, what kind of positive effects are these companies bringing to the table? And I think what we're doing, we're the biggest financer when it comes to research and development in Sweden, financing roughly 120 million euros a year to companies in different areas and sizes. We also need to be pragmatic. What solutions work? What solutions bring something? There's a lot of talk about hydrogen, for instance, and for sure it's interesting. And we see it in Sweden when it comes to fossil-free steel. But it's not interesting in all aspects. Sometimes we're talking about hydrogen solving all the problems. It's not. I think it's easy to get carried away. You need to be skeptical. You need to rely on the research that is available, not on the trends, on what people are saying on international conferences like COP, for instance. So I think those are 2 areas I would like to highlight. And then, of course, the circularity aspect of the startups, but also the rest of the value chain. It's not about just producing, it's also about the circularity, and where does that come in? How do we set up good value chains that actually contribute to a sustainable society? I think that's maybe the key issue. And sometimes the startups are focusing on just producing products and making some money, and that makes a lot of sense, but then we need to be hard on them. And I just would like to finish up by saying that we are measuring what our companies are bringing to the table. And so far, we can say that 90 innovations have the potential to save more than 25 times of Sweden's carbon emissions today. And that's 1.5 gigatons. And roughly these companies, plus another 200, we are supporting at the moment, 260 companies with 93 million euros. So I think I'll pause there and leave room for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niclas. And I think there's, again, a few things that I'd like to pick up on this tension between what's actually on the scientific agenda and being developed and the rhetorics in society. Because if you read mass media, you can get the idea of a few solutions, the bad and the good. But if you actually do your homework and look what's on the table, what's actually up here now being tested, you get a very different view. And I think that was why Sweden and India and other countries, Germany, and the International Agency joined the mission innovation to really focus more on what's actually happening here. Because for those who don't know that, in the Paris meeting, the countries with the largest investments in innovation brought together under this hat of mission innovation to say, we are not really looking at what's coming up here now, and we need a stronger focus on the next generation of solution providers and a more, as Niclas was saying, a more sort of sober look on what's actually out there, rather than what we wish for at these conferences where people say, oh, we have this and we will make this commitment by decades ahead. That sounds very nice, but is it really something? And the kind of maps that also the International Agency has done in terms of okay, we can talk about different things, but where do we have red lights where not progress being made? Where do we have yellow where something's happening? Or green, where we don't need to spend so much time because things are actually advancing there at a quite good pace. So let's make sure that we have a scientific approach to that. So I think that's really important. We only have 7 minutes left, and I think I would like to just go around if you have some comments and reflections on each other. So starting from the beginning again with you, Simon, in terms of the initiative that you might be aware of, that Frédéric, this sort of Catalyst program, and the kind of approach from Sweden, your thinking around that, etc. So Simon first.
Thanks, Dennis. I've been very impressed by the various things that I've heard. I think we mapped out the landscape internationally in this area. Starting more than a year ago. As I say, we published earlier this year this report, and things are still happening at a faster and faster pace. So if we were to rewrite the report now, then we'd be talking more about what's happening in India. We'd be talking about this work that Frédéric is doing, things that Niclas has just said, and I agree with pretty much everything that is said there. What we're not saying from the IEA is, we know what the solutions are. We need to just go out and fund a handful of startups that have this potential to reduce emissions. What we're saying is that there are some things that are going to require a more traditional approach, but allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom, supporting all of the good ideas that are around the world and allowing them to cross-fertilize, to have spillovers, to work in different countries is going to give us the greatest chance of success globally. And so I just wanted to make that point, that we're always going to be better off if we've got 1,000 good ideas than if we've pre-selected 10 champions from each country.
Very good point about really getting the multitude of solutions out there. Frédéric, your reflections.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I'm sorry if it was difficult to understand. Is it now a bit better? Okay, yeah. As I said earlier, I think I need to talk to Smita after this call. Actually, we have also, I have a great colleague in India from GIZ, so I think there could be a very nice exchange. And I think for the Catalyst initiative will be also super interesting to consider more in depth what Bennett was talking about in this most recent report. And obviously, Dennis, as we will work together in sorting out the most transformational startups that go through the Catalyst initiative. I'm really looking forward to this collaboration. And as I said earlier, the ambition is definitely there to show some exciting startups 1 year from now at next COP.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. Niclas, over to you. Reflections.
Yes, no, but I agree with the previous speakers, and I just would like to highlight that we need to understand what gaps there are. What kind of gaps do we need to fill? Sometimes we might need to focus on the governments when it comes to regulations, pushing the regulations, in a certain direction. That will actually make the difference for a company or several companies focusing on one area. And in other cases, it might be to help the companies to set up a pilot or a demonstration towards the UN with no funds available. They need to see that it's actually working before they can buy it, but the companies don't have the funds to do it themselves. So we need to be innovative when it comes to understanding where the gaps are and what kind of role we can play. Because I think it's very easy to always continue to work the same way as always. But I mean, the private sector is moving fast. It's developing all the time. So we need to adapt with that as well. So I would like to stress that.
Fantastic, Niclas. And finally, Smita, some final words, and what do we want to leave the audience, both here in COP, but also out there in the virtual world, with this fantastic challenge to bring incubators around the 1 gigaton challenge and bring that to the next COP and have this exponential journey from now. So your final thoughts, Smita.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's been fantastic working with the IEA and Simon and of course you, Dennis, but it was amazing to hear the work that Niclas and Frédéric are doing aligns and synergizes so well with our strategy and thought process. And that is what gives me hope, which is why we want to hear from all the incubators and those at the center and working closely with the solution providers on their strategy. So this call that we are launching to hear you all next year at COP28 is essentially to understand how we can co-learn from the strategies, which is geared towards an ambitious but not so audacious goal of, together achieving more than 1 gigatons of emission avoidance potential. But also, I just want to emphasize one point again, because it can't be highlighted less. Entrepreneurs will solve this problem. The new age entrepreneurs working on early stage innovation, which has not reached the market yet, will solve the problem. All we need to do is align as stakeholders enabling this ecosystem, align our own interest and understanding and priorities. I think we are going in multiple directions, and which is why this entire ecosystem isn't coming together. So yes, believing in the power of entrepreneurship, I see some hope. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And I would like just to close this by also mentioning yesterday, we launched this partnership with ICLEI, the largest network of cities around the world also. And we see this as very clearly linked, because of course we want to work with regions and cities that are hosting all these incubators. Because today still most cities and regions don't have incubators and accelerators as part of their climate strategy, because people are only asking cities to reduce their emissions. So what we also hope is to have this amazing collaboration with a new generation of solution providers, the incubators joining, but also the cities and regions and countries who come as solution providers to the next COP and say, yes, we will reduce our emissions, but maybe even more important as leaders, we will provide this to the rest of the world. So that is what true leadership is not to reach zero first, it's really to help the rest of the world to bring those solutions. So thank you very much for attending this session, and maybe one of the most exciting from my perspective, this sort of gigaton call for incubators that should have come much earlier, but at least we're here now and we can look forward to a very exciting process moving forward. Sweden, India already on board. Well, Germany is partly on board, I guess, with Frédéric also. So, but more countries, and especially from the global south, to really show that that's where lots of innovation is going to happen over the next decades. That's where the population growth is going to happen. That's where lots of new ideas needs to be found. Thank you very much, and look forward to work with you over the coming months.